Welcome to the Untold Story podcast, everybody. I'm Martha McCallum, and we are inside 2 months to the United States presidential election of 2024, Vice President Kamala Harris versus former President Donald Trump. So the polling, we're now in the season where the polling really counts. We're post Labor Day. People are paying close attention. So I'm really glad to be joined by my guest today, Chairman and CEO of Stagwell, pollster Mark Penn. He was an advisor to the Clintons, as well, of course, as anybody who follows politics knows Mark Penn's name very well. So Mark, great to have you with us. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
So let's talk about these latest numbers from the Harvard Caps Harris poll. They're very fresh at this point, and I'm just getting a first good look at them. Tell me what jumps out at you.
Well, first of all, it's a dead even race, at least in terms of the popular vote. No matter how we slice it and dice it, depending upon how you treat the open-ended, it's about 49-49. It's about 50-50, which, when you look at the rest of the poll, continues to be surprising, right? How is it that most people are unhappy with the economy, unhappy with the direction of the country, give President Biden a 42% job rating, and that Donald Trump is not ahead by 5 points or more, right? So that's the paradox. I think we have some answers to that paradox in this poll, but nevertheless, the post-Labor Day poll here, which is important because people got to talk about their political feelings with their family over the Labor Day weekend, going into debate, comes out even, which still favors Trump, because in the sense that usually the swing states here are just a little bit more likely to be Republican than the national vote because of all those Democrats in California and New York.
You know, there's so many interesting numbers in here, but one that jumps out at me right now is still weighing choices, 19%. So these are the late deciders. We're almost in the zone where we could consider these people to be late deciders, but 33% of those are independents, 14% GOP undecided, still weighing choices is the way you put it, and 13% Dems. So what do you think these undecided voters are waiting for and watching as we get closer to this big debate on Tuesday night?
Well, I think they're learning more about Harris, right? Where does she really stand on the issues? And they're kicking the tires on the Trump temperament, because I think when we ran a lot of issues and a lot of questions about their personalities, and it's really interesting that Harris is the candidate with better temperament and who stands for change, whereas Trump is the fighter who will get things done. And Trump is also the person with the advantage on the economy, against advantage on China, advantage on immigration. So there's a lot of things here. I think, is Trump going to be able to show that he has now a more experienced temperament to be a good president in a second term? I think that's, interestingly, from Trump, they're not really looking at him to take her down. I think they're looking at him to pass this test.
Yeah, it's very interesting that I love the way that you defined this, because they still don't know that much about her, even though she's been vice president for a while. She's been pretty under the radar in most respects. And they want to see if she has leadership qualities, and they want to see demonstrated a temperament that they can be comfortable with from former President Trump. So with regard, you know, I'm always kind of curious about when you look at where they stand on the issues, right? Trump does well on inflation, economy, immigration. She does better on abortion, which continue to be the top 3 issues here. But we've seen in the midterms that even when people felt that way, they didn't necessarily vote that way. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think people typically do vote on the economy. I think we're seeing something very interesting with Latino voters versus Black voters. Black voters have pretty much come back to the Democratic Party. They're showing pretty much a 50-point lead. Latino voters, not so fast. A lot of those Latino voters are working class voters. Their number one concern overwhelmingly is the economy. And I think you could really have a pretty well split 50-50 Latino vote here. And I think Trump could be in record territory for the Latino vote, primarily because of the economic issue. And one of the things Trump, I think, fails to do enough, he talks about immigration so much. He fails to talk enough about really his plan for the economy and dealing with the increase in prices, because that's the number one issue that's likely to propel him back if he wins.
He did start to outline that in a way that I thought for the first time was more forward-looking yesterday in his economic club address in New York. Do you think that was sort of a testing ground for Tuesday night and for making some of these points? Did anything there stand out to you in terms of something that you think he should focus on?
I only saw a couple of minutes of that, but I did watch the 2-hour Hannity extravaganza. And he's still in that 2-hour period. He always goes back to his home base of immigration. And whereas his home base should be it should be inflation programs. And one of the more interesting findings in the poll is that voters were not that antagonistic towards price controls. There was actually a lot of support for the Harris price control program. So I think Trump has a lot of work there. I think the difference between him winning or losing is, I think, just simply convincing people he's got a good second-term plan, taking some of those things that I heard about in his speech and really getting comfortable talking about them, because I didn't see him talk that much about them in the Hannity Hannity town hall.
I would agree that it was sort of a long list of greatest hits in the interview the other night. But I sense just from his campaign folks that he is trying to focus more specifically on the economy, and he presented a lot of specifics on cutting back on regulations for businesses, for small businesses, and a 15% corporate tax rate for companies who commit to making their product solely in the United States. And so in essence, there's a tax incentive, a benefit for a company that brings it all home in terms of manufacturing. One of the things that strikes me, though, is how do you articulate that to the American people in a way that makes them realize, well, actually, that would impact me and my prices, my economy of my family and my house. Those ideas, I think, are a little bit tougher to grasp than, oh, I'm going to give you $25,000 for your first house and $5,000 for your first baby. That's a pretty tangible, graspable idea, even though the economics of it can be argued.
Yeah. So, like, today I run a large corporation, and I understand that we take the money that's left over after taxes and interest rates, and then we invest it in growth and jobs. Mm-hmm. And we do that. And if they raise the corporate tax rate, every dollar of increased corporate tax rate is pretty much a dollar we don't invest in growth and jobs. Right. And that's why I actually think the original Trump tax cuts were so effective. And being able to communicate, I agree with you, that's awfully hard for people to realize, who don't sit in a boardroom like me and actually allocate those dollars and realize, what else are we going to do with them? We generally, most companies are really trying to stimulate growth. I do think, however, that people realize that handouts of big checks to people gets neutralized by inflation. And in the end, people get nothing. In fact, they wind up paying higher prices. And I think Trump's got to do an effective job at saying, sure, she says she's not going to raise taxes on you. And by the way, he's got a big advantage on taxes. But if inflation goes up because of government expenditures, that's the biggest tax of all on you.
Right. And I think it can be a concept that's a little difficult to translate to people who don't, spend their time and focus on those kinds of issues. So I agree with you completely on that. So what's your sense of how much people like and trust Kamala Harris, given all the discussion of how she has flip-flopped on a number of major issues?
look, she's got much better ratings in this. Her personal ratings, see, Trump is really at a personal high. He's at about 47% personal favorable, but she's at 47% personal favorable. Now, attitudes towards Trump have really been accumulated over a long period of time. Attitudes towards Harris, well, she was at 38% 2 months ago, right? If you ask Harris, what has she really done? Name 5 things. Her attitudes to her are really pretty thin, right? And so they're subject to a lot more variation. But if you look at it today, more people said they wanted to know more about what she thinks, but than they did for Trump. So they have a better sense of Trump, who he is. But that's not stopping them from at least, I don't know how much room she's got to go up from 47. But
Right.
you can say this debate is a game changer, right? If she comes off as a strong change candidate with reasonable ideas, she could gain considerably. And if Trump comes off as a more experienced, temperamentally more consistent candidate who'll restore the economy, for working people who have been hit by inflation, he can win, right? And so I think they each have kind of a path here that maybe nothing will happen from this, but we saw how quickly opinion can change after the Biden debate.
Yeah, we sure did.
The Untold Story continues right after this.
Part of me, although obviously we'll be covering it from stem to stern and watching every second, I wouldn't be completely surprised if they come out of this sort of with each person's supporters saying that they won. And anything, different from that will be because there's a huge moment, right? There's something that either really helps someone or really debilitates one of these candidates. I think it's interesting you said that in terms of interviews and exposure, most people think she's doing enough.
Yeah, I was surprised by that. I had some questions, like I expected everyone to say, oh, she's not enough and whatnot. People don't always like to hear as much from political candidates as you and I do.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've gone on this bender lately, both on X, and I had a piece on Fox News where I said, look, I can't conceive in a presidential race, there should be 3 debates, one of which should really be on foreign affairs. After all, we're going to give this person $6 trillion and 1 million plus people and thousands of nuclear warheads. We ought to really test them. They ought to have policy papers, and they ought to go before the press several times a week. When I ran campaigns, the press would go crazy if we didn't go out after just 2 days, 3 max.
Yeah.
Right. And the institutions aren't doing their job. Right. The presidential debate, they all got kind of infected with partisanship. And so they're not forcing the campaigns to give people what it really takes to be an informed voter. And that's the biggest problem. I always say it doesn't matter who wins, as long as the voters get to really make choices consistent with what they believe. And if you don't know what the candidates stand for, it's pretty hard to do that.
Absolutely. I've been saying this a lot lately, but I think that what we've witnessed with this messy process of debates and whether or not there's going to be them is that the Presidential Commission on Debates actually performed a pretty good function, and that they did it since 1987. Every candidate assumed that if you win your nomination, that means you're going to do three presidential debates and 1 VP debate, and the commission would decide the moderators, and they would pick the best people in their assessment who would be fair and would moderate. And in the past, they picked moderators from Fox News, from NBC, from CBS, from the whole gamut. Do you think we'll ever get back to that, Mark?
I hope so, because we have to. We can't. Look, you saw what happened when Biden wasn't subjected to the normal democratic processes, and he should never have had the nomination. And the minute he was subjected and we had a debate, the public said, oh my God, right? He can't possibly run for a second term. So that was the proof that these things serve a real function in democracy, without which people can be snookered. And when I see this as a deliberate campaign strategy, look, I understand, I ran campaigns. We didn't want to put our candidate out there every day, and we want to have some control over the message, but this has gone way too far. Your candidate has to be able to be president of the United States, handle themselves for a couple of hours, answer the issues and what they really stand for, and have a discussion of what's going on in Israel versus Hamas, or Ukraine versus Russia, and have an intelligent commentary on that.
Absolutely. Are you in agreement with the idea that this really comes down to Pennsylvania and Georgia, or do you think there are other surprise sort of moving states out there that people aren't focusing on?
Yeah, I do think that the Pennsylvania and Georgia probably are the critical states, but I never believe that. People always say, "Oh, it all came down to 20,000 voters." I don't believe in that model, because I always had a model from the most Democratic to the most Republican state, and somewhere there's always going to be a dividing line. But the messages that change voters are very much national messages that are communicated, across the spectrum, and those voters represent much larger blocks of voters and trends that are happening in this election. I think that it is really kind of interesting, and occasionally there's a local issue. Maybe fracking in Pennsylvania will prove to be, an energy to be one of those issues. Like in Nevada, it was always about the nuclear waste dumps that could be a differentiating issue. Or I believe the Cuban vote in Florida, really had an impact in 2016 that the Obama and the Democrats didn't realize. But by and large here, I believe one of these candidates will pick up some incremental momentum here. Right. And they're not going to bring it. Look, none of them are running a swing voter campaign where they're going to win by a landslide. But I do think the momentum coming out of this debate will enable one of them to win by 2 points, hopefully. Clearly, I do think Pennsylvania, all crossroads do come to Pennsylvania. I put out, again, a story urging that she pick Josh Shapiro, and she didn't. And that to me was very telling. It said that she was more concerned about the base, not going to really break with them in a really meaningful way. With Shapiro, even at, like, if I were an advisor, I would have to say Pennsylvania's it, Shapiro's it. We can go home now.
Right. And since you brought it up, is the Vance pick a plus or a minus on the Trump side?
If it's a plus, we don't see it, right? As a national pick, first of all, I think the vice presidents have now kind of served their purpose. We had a lot of discussions about who they would be, right. And we picked them apart. And I think Vance isn't going to play with what I call Northeastern elites, right? If Vance is a positive, it's because he will play in some of these critical states with a critical working class voting group. And the fact that we don't like him, I used to show my political ads to the clients and the donors, and I say, if anybody likes these ads, there's something wrong with them.
Right.
And so I think that's the thing about the Vance pick. If we liked him, probably something, he wouldn't serve the purpose for which I think he won. Now, I always thought Rubio would be a better pick, because I do think the Latino voters are very much in play. And just as I thought Shapiro would have been a better pick for her, I would have thought Rubio was a better pick. And nationally, I think the Democratic Oppo research was really effective on Vance, but that doesn't mean he isn't playing with working class voters in critical states. We really wouldn't know that.
That's a good point. Before I let you go, if you were advising each of these candidates for Tuesday night, tell Harris and Trump, do more of this and less of that. What would you say to each?
Look, I think Harris, it's pretty straightforward. Take Trump down. You classically have done reasonably well with attacks. Go out and attack him. You've convinced people he's for a national abortion ban. Just press your issues, appear competent. Don't let your foot off the pedal because he's very effective counterpuncher and debater. And so, and I think the job for her is kind of relatively easier, right, in content. I think for Trump, it'd be, get a lot sharper on the economic stuff, really trying to feel more emotive about that. Don't talk only about immigration. And they wanted to keep those mics on because they wanted to blow your temperament. So how you see him now, which by the way, I do think he carries himself, I notice really, really much more calmly, and how you carry yourself and how you wind up not, over attacking her, even in response, will play well, because if you just don't create another issue here that comes out of this debate, you probably win, because people are unhappy with the conditions. They're unhappy with the economy. They think that it's going in the wrong direction. All of those atmospherics that normally determine races, if your personality is not the main one, then you're going to win.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting. I also think that both candidates can play the "we're not going back" line. And, I think it'd be interesting to see how much Trump focuses on the last few years and the experience that the country already has with this candidate, because I think there are a lot of people who think of her as a brand new, a brand new person that they're getting to know. And yeah, I agree. And for him, I just think that the less he talks about how he's been wronged in the past, that's a big plus. Every time he sort of leaves that stuff to the side and focuses on the future and what the second Trump presidency would do for people, I think that that's the ground where he would want to be. So it's always interesting to kick these things around with you and play both sides of for both of these folks, because they have a lot of people in the room like you at the moment, and a lot of people like me watching and reporting on it. So Mark, thank you. It's always good to talk to you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
I'm Martha McCallum. That is the Untold Story for today. Join us next time.
You've been listening to The Untold Story with Martha McCallum. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Make sure to rate and review. For more podcasts, go to foxnewspodcast.com. Listen ad-free with the Fox News Podcast Plus subscription on Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Prime members can listen to this show ad-free on the Amazon Music app.